Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to just take care of a couple of housekeeping items. You can ask your questions in the chat below. We'll be answering them throughout the end. We'll be sharing relevant links for you during the presentation, so look out for those also in the chat. You'll be emailed a recording of this presentation as well as our seller's guide, and you can contact any of us afterwards to answer any of your questions. I'm Victoria Alexander. I'm the owner of Realty Collective, a boutique real estate firm I started 16 years ago to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate agents. We're basically your coach, your therapist, and your sounding board, helping you through the emotional roller coaster that is selling real estate in New York. And my co-host tonight is Rashidah Siddiqui, a long-term partner of mine that I've been working with she was my lawyer when I bought my house 11 years ago now, and has worked on more than 2 or 3 dozen deals at this point. I can't even count. Rashidah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Lovely being part of another great seminar this afternoon. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I am a real estate attorney. I've been practicing for going on 18 years now. Represent first-time buyers, sellers in the market, whether it's in New York and also in New Jersey. I pride myself on hopefully making the transaction as smooth as possible. And I look forward to giving tips regarding preparing the seller for what you need to do in getting your property ready to be put on the market, and also things that we as attorneys need to help you out when you get into contract.
First slide there, Meredith. Why do people sell? People grow out of their space. They want more space, so they trade up. Their property is in high demand right now, and they want to, sell and capture some of their assets and use it for something else. They're ready to move out of New York City. Lots of reasons for it to sell right now. It's a good time to be a seller in New York because we are in what I would consider a seller's market. I think next slide. Things to consider when you're thinking about selling. Market has changed in the past few months, encouraging news and improving economy. Return to normalcy has made there be a large demand for property and not a ton of inventory. So it has really been a driving factor for the hot market that we are in right now. Interest rates are really low, so buyers are going up and feel a sense of urgency to take advantage of those low interest rates. And we really were in a lull for a long time, and things were really on hold. So these are the things to consider when you're thinking about selling your property. Is your property something that is going to move in this market? And what are people really looking for? So next slide. A lot of people are looking for outdoor space. People used to really care about school performance and school district. There is about to be a redistricting in South Brooklyn. So I'm sure it's still a consideration for some people. Multifamily versus single family, parking, washer, dryer, dishwasher, having amenities, doorman, location, working from home is now a big consideration, probably because, one of the COVID things. Anything else to consider when thinking about selling?
I think also timing wise, are you looking to, are you moving out of state? Where you're moving to afterwards as well? How long that you're going to need when you're selling in order to purchase another property or rent another property? So definitely timing as well.
I agree. I think that's always the hardest thing and challenging thing for people to think about. And it's the first thing we talk about in our seller guide that we provide to sellers, is thinking about what your next move is. Do you buy your next place first? Do you sell first? Do you rent in between? Really, how do you juggle that transition? So, so not a lot of people are in the position to buy something else until they sell their first property. There are things like a bridge loan or a HELOC where it could hold you over in between, but a lot of people end up having to rent in between buying something else because we're in such a hot market. Sellers don't want to take a contingent deal because that just, that's risky for them. Next slide, Meredith. The other thing that we like to talk about is calculating your break-even horizon. And one of the biggest things people have to take into consideration for that is your closing costs. So some properties have transfer taxes, flip tax, mortgage payoff, realtor commissions, capital gains, and other fees. Do you want to talk about any of those closing costs, Rashidah?
So yeah, definitely thinking about capital gains. If it was your primary residence, if it wasn't your primary residence, you may be subject to capital gains. If it was, and you've lived there for 2 out of the last 5 years, you get an exemption, 250,000 for individuals, 500,000 for a couple. So definitely something you want to think about when you put it in, when you're putting your property on the market, because you do have to think about what happens when you do your taxes the following year. Are you going to have any capital gains that you have to think about? And also, if you're renting the property, maybe you want to think about what we call as 1031 exchange. Is it investment property? Even if you use it partly as your primary, maybe you is a two-family, or you at some point you were living in the co-op or the condo as your home, and then you moved out in the last year and you've been subletting it. So now you have different things that you can think about. But capital gains is a big thing that you need to consider. Transfer taxes, obviously, New York City and New York State, paying off your mortgages that you have on the property and your home equity lines, and of course the real estate commission as well, and any open taxes, water, et cetera, that you have on the property.
And I think that there's a rule of thumb that we use for closing costs for the sell side is like 7 to 8% for most property. And that ranges both from co-ops, condos, and 1 to 4 family houses. Do you think that's about right?
Yeah, because the transfer taxes is roughly, I would say, nearly 2%, 1.825%. And then you have the your real estate commission. So I would say, yeah, 7 to 8% you're looking at, aside from you paying off your mortgage.
Right. That's an important part.
Yes.
Next slide, Meredith. So this is something we were just talking about. Do you have a plan after you sell? And that's the first thing I usually talk to people about when I'm taking on their listing is where are you going? What's your timeline? And what's most important to you? Some people want the most amount of money out of the situation and the transaction. Some people want it to be the least burdensome on their lifestyle, and that like as easy as possible. They don't want to stage, they don't want to clean. You know, there's some people that are just, they have certain goals. And the most important thing is facilitating. For me, my job is to facilitate your goals. And that's the first thing you should talk about when you're meeting with real estate brokers. What are the goals you have for your property? Is it a quick, you want this over with and painless as possible, or you want to maximize your return on your investment? So you're willing to jump through hoops to make sure that you get every single dollar that you can.
And I was just harping again regarding the timing. For a house, your closing typically closes within 60 days. So when you put your property on the market, if you just put it on the market and then all of a sudden you get an offer, you're looking at closing within 60 days. And that may seem, it's right around the corner by the time you realize it. For a co-ops, you may be looking at 90 days. So you definitely want to think far in advance what your plan or part of is in regard to getting out of the property, because most contracts, you have to deliver the property vacant and broom clean on the closing date. And if you're looking at a longer time period, this is something that your realtors can negotiate. So they can say, okay, we need a 90-day closing, or we're looking to close more in, September. So those are things. So when you're looking at buyers, they know going in that timing wise is that you have thought about that as well.
A real estate agent that I work with a lot recently told me that he's negotiating a lot of post-possession agreements right now. Are you seeing a rise in those? And what do those usually look like?
I definitely see a rise in them because, as I said, clients are buying and selling at the same time. So and there can be negotiated. A standard post-possession is maybe 7 days. So that gives you enough time, hopefully, to coordinate both your closings on your buy and your sale, that you only have 7 days to stay in possession, move out. Longer ones we're seeing now is maybe 30 days or longer. The issue with having something past 30 days is now it technically can become a landlord-tenant situation, even though we have an agreement that said it doesn't create that to kind of buffer that post 30 days if it goes longer. And then there's different ways we can negotiate and put together an agreement. But I am seeing a lot of that now. And I have conversations with my clients now, especially when they're buying or selling, or even if they're thinking about renting, or they're moving out of state because, they need the funds to move and find something in another state. But I'm seeing a lot more post possessions coming in.
Me too. People are just asking about them. And I just say, talk to your lawyer because they're complicated. Yeah. Next slide, please. So you've decided to sell. Next slide. The first thing you want to do is assemble your team. You want to interview real estate brokers. You want to interview attorneys, and then you want to collect your due diligence materials. So what are some of the questions that you think are important, Rashidah, when people are looking to interview to hire you as your attorney?
Definitely timing. What are your fees? What is included? Am I working with you? Am I working with a paralegal? As an attorney, especially when I'm representing sellers, my frame of mind is let's be proactive. So I like to look up your property to see if there's any open any open applications, any open permits, any open violations on the premises, because those hold up your closing. I always ask clients, hopefully, do they have a copy of their deed? If they don't, I can look it up. Do they have a copy of their stock certificate or proprietary lease if it's a co-op? Because we want to make sure that your name is spelled correctly. Does your bank have a copy of it? So any kind of things that can potentially cause a issue in your sale, you want to ask your attorney, how many closings do they do? Do they represent a lot of sellers? What is their framework when they represent? Do they attend the closing? Do they send a paralegal to the closing? And do they go over the closing costs with you? Because that's also being part of preparing you for your end of the closing at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's super important, especially with condos and co-ops, is making sure before you list, collecting all the due diligence material so that when you do find a buyer, you could move really quickly. Making sure you have a copy of your offering plan, any financials, being in touch with the management company about any of the rules and regulations about selling your property. We have a deal now, with you that the seller didn't notify the condo board, and they now have all these things that are holding up us moving forward because she didn't notify them correctly that she had put the property on the market. And that ultimately was, in my opinion, her real estate broker's mistake, that he should have been in touch with them about selling the property. Some of the things that I think are important to ask are you available for your real estate brokers? Is it you showing? Are you available? What days do you take off? Are you available on the weekends? Do you have a team, if you're not available, that can show for you? Is your team showing, or is it actually you? Because sometimes you think you're hiring me, but then I would send my minions, but it's me if you're hiring me. Some of the other real estate questions that, how many listings do you currently have? How long have you been working as an agent? Do you have an assistant or team? What's your marketing and plan and strategy for the apartment? Because for me, I think it's super important that marketing is actually, for real estate, people see it as a simple thing, like taking pictures and putting it on the market. But it's just like any other marketing. You're selling a story and a lifestyle to somebody, and how you do that is speaking to the potential buyer. So envisioning who the buyer is for your property, and then creating the story around it and the narrative around it. It's usually the seller 5 to 10 years ago. That's how that usually works out. Next slide, Meredith. Soliciting buyers, like I kind of just mentioned, navigating some of the COVID trend, understanding the neighborhood and the assets of value, and telling the story. You can go to what else do I have? Soliciting buyers. Working with somebody that understands the neighborhood and relates to your potential buyer. If you want personalized service, making sure that you're hiring somebody that's going to be hands-on and available all the time when you're up at night, 11 o'clock at night, like, oh, this new listing came on the market and this is our competition. Are they going to address any material issues and problems with the property with you? It's always better to get ahead of the problems so that they don't come up in inspection and down the line, and buyers don't see them as big red flags. So if you have a little crack in your wall, or, there was water damage that you never fixed, address it before you take photos, before you put it on the market. Be wary. We always tell people to be wary of virtual staging. it's very misleading. And I think that it leads people to be disappointed in the space. They see pictures that have an apartment full of furniture and then they show up and it's an empty space, and people really do have a hard time envisioning the space. So I think really if you're going to do staging, you should do real staging and not virtual staging. Blah, blah, blah. And talking to an attorney first before you list so we can address any other issues. Anything else on there? You want to go to the next slide, Meredith? Next slide. Did that part? I skipped ahead. Considering offers. Go ahead. I'm going to pass it to Rashidah to talk through any of the terms that, like I said, post-possession agreement, anything like that. No, keep on the other slide, Meredith, to think about when you're considering the offers that have come in.
So as a seller, definitely some of the considerations that you should think about when you accept an offer is timing, which we talked about a little bit, how long you need to close. And then whether you're going to need post-possession or not, which means you have the right to stay in the property for a short time period after you close. Secondly, I've been seeing this a lot lately regarding appraisals, especially if offers are coming in above asking. So, you know, are they waiving their appraisal contingency, or they're given a minimum appraisal contingency? So those are some things that you want to discuss as well. And then always the as-is clause. You have in there what is truly as is. As is means that, you know, heating, plumbing, electrical systems in working order to the extent they're working now. Definitely when they do their inspection, things may come up and you want to find out, you know, are they, you know, are they renovating? So really, you know, they don't care about the crack in the window or something like that. So those are things that you want to consider as well. There's not, I would say, as we start opening up a lot, we don't have much for like the COVID considerations that we were thinking about as far as delaying the closing for a time period, remote closings. We're starting to have back in-person closings, but definitely something that still as a seller, you want to speak with your attorney about is power of attorneys. Are you going to attend the closing in person? Are you going to be in the state so that you need to attend the closing in person? If not, whether you're going to give your attorney power of attorney to close on your behalf. And then just also logistically getting the funds to you after the closing. Is it going to be a wire? Are they going to overnight you your check? Are you doing a 1031 exchange? So that language has to go in there as well. But definitely those are some of the things that you want to, as you start thinking about accepting the offers. And main one, I would say, is the timing, especially as a seller.
100%. I agree. The timing is super important. Then after you've countered all your offers, because you always counter, like I said, take your first offer seriously. I think that people are like, oh, we just put it on the market. It's our first offer and we got asking. The first offer is very likely your buyer. They are prepared. They've been in the market and they know what they want and they're ready to go. Don't discount them just because they're first or they came in at asking. It's a big mistake. The other thing that, you know what I think I always forget to mention when interviewing real estate brokers for selling is do not pick the person that gives you the highest selling price for your property. It's a very rookie mistake is that we're all looking at the same data. 5 people are going to tell you it's going to sell for 500,000 and one person tells you 600,000. That's misleading you in a big way because we all have access to the same information, the same comps. They don't know something that we don't. We're all on the same page usually. And if there's somebody, the person that's at the bottom, at the top, eliminate them and pick the people that are somewhere in the middle. I've seen it done so many times. Somebody was like, oh, well, we would have gone with you, but this other person told us they could get this much money. And so we went with them, but then they couldn't do it. So the market is the market. If we underprice or overprice, the market's going to tell us. The market tells us what your property is worth. And you only need one buyer. That's always something I always think that people forget is that you just need one person to buy your property. It doesn't matter how many people come to your open house. You only need one of them to fall in love. Next slide. Documents you'll need. We went over a little bit of this. Anything you want to elaborate on?
So actually, this is a good, I'm going to mention the owner's policy or survey. If you have a house and you're selling your house, when you purchase the property, you should have got some documents. I say never throw away your documents from your purchase until even after you sell it, keep it still, maybe scan it now and put it together. I have a closing tomorrow that our client purchased. Well, I didn't represent him when he purchased, but he purchased the property in 2013. And you get an owner's policy, which says that the title company, everything was done correctly, mortgages were paid off, there's no issues. Now he's trying to sell it 2021, and there's an open mortgage from when he originally purchased it in 2013. I'm calling the attorney that represented him. They got rid of all those documents. The client got rid of the documents. The title company went out of business, and we're trying to find out where is this mortgage company that's also out of business that is now holding up this closing. Good thing I have different heads. So I thought about the bank attorney. I was like, they must have the documents. And we were able to track down the bank attorney to get copies of all of his documents from 2013. So keep all of your documents as a seller. So go through before you start shredding and moving things and getting stuff ready for the open houses, put all of your paperwork aside or scan it.
Scan it.
Your survey, your owner's policy, a copy of your deed. Not so much important, but because the deed is easily available now with public records. But if you have that stock copies of your stock certificate, if you refinance any of that paperwork, because sometimes things happen throughout that if you've had the property for a long time. If you did any alterations, if you hired contractors and they were supposed to close off permits, any kind of documentation you want to hold on to and get that together, because your attorney may say, hey, do you have a copy of that agreement, or do you have a copy of that document that can help us take care of an issue that came up at close or prior when we get the title?
I still have my very thick packet from when I bought my house that you sent over after the closing in a filing cabinet that thankfully, didn't go underwater during Sandy. But also thankfully, I had my elevation certificate that I got from the developer in that packet that they had to provide because my flood insurance policy was wrong after Sandy. And I did submit the elevation certificate when I got my flood insurance policy, and they misread it or didn't look at it. And I had to fight with the insurance company to get my policy withheld after Sandy. So thankfully I had that in that giant packet. And this is the second or third time I've had this issue with. So you brought up two issues that I are having right now is that a lawyer that represented a seller of mine did not do this research and found an old mortgage that has not been resolved, that now they have to hold the money until it gets resolved after closing, which we've been in contract now for 3 months at this point. He should have done it at the beginning because it would have been resolved by now. Instead of being at the closing, we have to close with it not being solved. And Tina had a deal like that too, that there was a mortgage that came up on a title that wasn't resolved. But I had a client that has an open permit that the sellers agreed to close the permit. But then we found out after they've agreed to that, or the whole apartment is that rebuilt illegally. And so they can't close the permit unless they gut the whole apartment and bring it back to a state, because part of it is in a cellar and you can't have a full kitchen and bath in a cellar, which they do have. And it's like a whole nightmare. So it's super important that you get all of your due diligence and everything figured out before you come to market, so you avoid some missteps that could cost you time and money and derail your deal, and you might lose your buyers and have to start all over again. And nobody wants to do that, because then once your property's been on the market the deal gets derailed, they're like, what's wrong with it? And it's already a red flag. So avoid all of those hurdles as much as possible by being prepared and working with people that prepare you to sell correctly. Next slide. Underwriting, closing the deal. This is all on the buy side, basically, I think, unless there's anything you're waiting for the buyer to get all this stuff together, and then closing the deal.
So closing the deal is, I always say, it's like a juggling act. Thankfully, there's so many different parties now, especially, well, even when we were doing remote closings, I think it was even harder that sometimes, because you have to try to figure out getting documents to everyone in advance and then making sure that everyone has it on the day of the closing, and then wires and things like that. So now that things are opening up, we're having more in-person closings. So now it's more about just making sure everyone's available on that date and on that time. And then making sure that if it's a co-op, that your mortgage person, your payoff attorney is arriving to the closing. So it's roughly, it's, as I said, it's a juggling act. You have maybe 7 different parties that you're coordinating for a co-op, 4 different parties for a house transaction, 5 or 6 for a condo that we have to get. And most important, as a seller, I think it's easier. I mean, it's great for you to be there at the closing, but your part is maybe 15 to 20 minutes of signing documents, and then you're waiting for your check. So don't feel like you have to jump through hoops to be at the closing. You can pre-sign documents and give your attorney limited power of attorney if you can't attend in person. But as I said, it's always nice to kind of turn over the keys if you want to see your new buyer and who's taking over your new property as well.
I think that that it's been actually incredibly hard to schedule closings recently. I know that that's been a real struggle for a lot of the buyers to have. They get the clear to close and then they can't get everybody on the same page, just because I think things are opening back up and people have commitments now, unlike before. I think that's, and the only thing is going to give you for closing, you can go to the next slide, Meredith, is doing the final walkthrough. You have to prepare your property, get all your stuff out and deliver the property in the condition that you've promised to the buyer. So you have to vacate the premise, and we have to do premises and then do a final walkthrough with the buyer. And if there's any issues that come up, then, you know, your dishwasher is not working, the washer dryer is not working. You have to solve those or give a credit to the buyer at closing. I think that last time we talked about concessions and all that, and we talked about the seller's handbook. You can go to the last slide. I think that's the end of the presentation. After this presentation, I have a seller's handbook that has tons of information to prep people for selling that I will email to everybody. There's a bunch of people on the call. So is there any questions? You can put them in the chat or take yourself off mute if you'd like to ask them. It's like Jeopardy. I can't even do the do. Rashidah, any last comments or ideas or things you want to share? I can send everybody a follow-up outgoing, you know, Rashidah and I will talk to anybody for free, give you guys advice to get things going. There's no charge for talking to us.
I always say as a seller, preparation in advance is better. Be proactive. So get yourself preparing your property and your documents for your closing, because the more, as Victoria had mentioned earlier, you don't want to have the buyer thinking there's an issue, that something small, and now it's like, wait, why is this? And now it becomes bigger in their head when it's a small thing that could have been taken care of if you had planned in advance for getting your documents and not having delays in working with your attorney, working with your realtor to get your property prepared for the closing.
Exactly. Great. Well, so since there's no questions, you guys reach out to us if you need anything. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye, guys.
Everyone.
Thank you, everybody.